So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Mike McClure, and he is an award-winning director at the Yaffe Group for over 25 years. He was responsible for the creative product of the agency. He is also their expert in social and digital media, serving for 5 years as the president of the Social Media Club Detroit and serving several more as the vice president of the Social Media Association of Michigan. Mike uses the unique combination of creative thinking and having a good pulse on community engagement that has led to the fruition of many successful campaigns and creative executions for a wide variety of clients. He has also developed digital and social media strategies for clients, as well as content mapping, content marketing, and SEO. Mike started at JWT and BBDO, then worked on his own as a writer, producer, and director for 2 years. Some of the accounts he has worked on include Ford, Dodge, Chevy, Total Door Systems, Munder Capital, Detroit Free Press and News, Michigan Department of Education, just to name a few. His session today is going to focus on creating culturally appropriate content. I'm super excited to hear what he has to say, and I hope you are as well. So without any further ado, Mike, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mike McClure, as she said. There are ways to connect with me at the bottom if you want to connect with me afterwards. And like you, I'm a little sad that we weren't able to meet together in person. You know, I was looking forward to having the adventure of a nice road trip and being put up in a nice hotel where I could have a little evening respite. I was looking forward to seeing my one Kalamazoo friend, hey Adonis, and on his home turf, and enjoying a few of the local libations afterwards. And most of all, I was looking forward to being able to present to each of you. In fact, I had a whole set of cards made up just in case I was mobbed by adoring fans once we're done. But then things happened, and so here we are 7 months later. But I got to thinking about what are the positives. You know, for one thing, I get to do something I've never done before. I've never done a virtual keynote speech, so it's a new adventure. And turns out, if I suck at it, there's no angry mob to come up and tell me all about it after I'm done. And of course, being virtual, I could possibly be presenting to even more people than if we were there together last March. When they first contacted me to be the keynote speaker, I had just 2 weeks to prepare. But all of a sudden, thanks to the pandemic, I had 7 months to prepare. So you know, I had all this time to think about it, do some research. Of course, being a creative person, I waited until there was 2 weeks to prepare to start actually putting pen to paper. But it turned out. I think you'll enjoy it. And of course, I have the advantage of being able to present and not wear a tie or pants. I also get a chance, I was going to be opening up Kalamazoo Social Media Week, which was exciting, but now I'm opening up Kalamazoo Social Media Month, which is way huger. So thank you for joining us today. Let's get into how you can create culturally appropriate content. A few things happened there during the interim as well. We found out, for one thing, the difference between being appropriate and not can be very small. In fact, it can be one word. With everything going on this summer, if you were a brand who was putting out sincere content supporting Black Lives Matter, you're tying to a very emotional cultural movement. However, if you were a brand who made one small change and was putting out content about all lives matter, well, you may have been sincere, and it may be true that all lives matter, but if that's how you're connecting with the culture, you don't get the point, and you're not connecting at all. So I'd like to take a first couple of lessons in creating culturally appropriate content came from this summer's Black Lives Matter and how different brands connected to it. Some brands did a really good job and some brands didn't, and there's lessons in both. The first lesson we learned is you need to be authentic. If your brand is authentic behind the things that you're going to support, people will respond well. You know, if you're going to tie in to something, it has to be part of the culture of your own brand. If not, people are going to call you out. You're going to look like you're just chasing the latest hashtag or the most trending topic. So make sure if you're going to tie into a movement that it's authentic to your brand. Ben & Jerry's was able to do that. They put out really strong messaging in their content. We must dismantle white supremacy. Silence is not an option. What happened to George Floyd is not the result of a bad apple. It was the predictable consequence of a racist and prejudiced system and culture that has treated Black bodies as the enemy from the beginning. Ben & Jerry's was able to put out content like this because they have a long history of fighting social injustice and tying into causes. In fact, they've supported the Black Lives Matter since 2016. And just last year, they introduced ice cream called Justice Remixed, just to bring awareness to the need for justice reform and systemic racism. So when they put out content tying into Black Lives Matter, it makes sense because it's authentic to their brand, and people took a notice. Here's one that talks about how she noticed that even the founders of Ben & Jerry got arrested for protesting. So she's going to be buying their ice cream. Other results, you see here on the left, we've got one person took a photo of a whole bunch of Ben & Jerry's ice cream they bought. After reading Ben & Jerry's opinions on Black Lives Matter, this is what they did. And then we've got another one over here who says, your company, land message about solidarity. Ben & Jerry's, we have the tools to dismantle white supremacy, and our next flavor is going to be called Burn the Bootlickers. And then finally, you have another person. Ben & Jerry has had balls to use the words Black and white supremacy in their official corporate statement. I don't even like Ben & Jerry's ice cream that much, but I might try it out more because I have newfound respect for the company has to call out the truth. And that's what being authentic to a cause, that's the kind of response you can get. What happens if you're not authentic to the cause? Well, let's take a look at Amazon. All right, here we go. Amazon put out a perfectly good statement. It says the inadequate and brutal treatment of Black people in our country must stop. Together we stand in solidarity with the Black community, our employees, our customers, and partners in the fight against systemic racism and injustice. It's a perfectly fine, perfectly supportive piece of content tying into the movement. The problem is it wasn't authentic to their brand, so they got called out. Like this person here says, funny, coming from the company that fired a Black man for asking for safer working conditions during COVID, sells Nazi flags, and remains the last large advertiser on Breitbart, which once featured a Black crime section, despite being asked to stop by 600 plus of your diverse workers. So if you're trying to tie into something and it's not authentic to your brand, that's the kind of response you can expect. Another lesson we learned from the Black Lives Matter movement and how different brands tied into it is you have to follow through on your promises. If you're going to make a promise, if you're going to try and connect with a culture or a group by promising something, you have to follow through on it. You know how social media works. If you make a promise and don't follow through, you're going to hear about it. Wendy's has had a stellar reputation in social media. They do fun stuff, especially on their Twitter account, where they go back and forth with competitors, tie into things that are going on. They have a very good reputation and a very robust social media presence. And in the wake of the protests and everything, they put out a series of tweets that end with these two. Our employees have spoken loud and clear. We have a lot more to do than just a donation. We're committed to doing the work and we hear you. In the coming days, we'll be using our Twitter account to amplify Black voices, because what's the point of this big platform if we don't use it for what matters during these times? As you can see, they got a lot of, they got almost 14,000 likes. They got 1,500 retweets and 1,400 comments. Everybody was behind that. It was a great for them to do. The problem is 11 days later, they had gone dark on social media. All they had done was answer customer queries and one retweet of a post about the donation that they did make. So understandably, they got backlash. Especially after Rayshard Brooks was shot by a police officer in one of their parking lots. There still was no response. So they not only did they not amplify the Black voices as they promised to, but when one of their location was involved in a matter, there was still no response. So as you can see, Mike here called them out. Y'all being real quiet right now. Hashtag say his name, hashtag Rayshard Brooks. And then another, your 11 days of silence speaks volumes. Not as loud as the people though. RIP, hashtag Rayshard Brooks, hashtag Wendy's is over. Even the news media picked up on the fact that they had promised to amplify voices and then ghosted. So if you're gonna make a promise, you have to follow through on it, or it'll do more damage than if you said nothing at all. But chances are you're not tying into big national events with a big national brand. But whoever you're working for, whoever you're creating content for, if it's your own organization or someone else, chances are your content is going to be consumed by people in different cultures. And you want to make sure that you connect with them in appropriate ways. So one way you can do that is to put yourself in their shoes. Look at things from their perspective. What are the things that drive them? What are the things that drive them crazy? For instance, if you want to put out a post on International Women's Day about empowering women, probably having them all sitting around eating cake around a washer and dryer isn't the way to go. Another thing you want to do is you want to talk to your audience. Find out what their likes, what their dislikes, what's important to them. How are they different from other cultures, and how are they the same? Hold on just a moment. So to walk you through how my team and I have created culturally appropriate content, I'm going to walk you through a project that we've been working on for the last year and a half. And the project was to create content specifically to connect with groups of families in Michigan that have either a cultural or a linguistic barrier from getting the information they need about how to, about the importance of early learning for children 0 to 5. There's a lot of research that shows the simple things you do with your child before age 5 make a huge impact, not on just how well they do in school, but how well they do later in life. And they're easy things to do, and we just want to get the information in the hands of people who are marginalized and have barriers to getting that information. So it tended to be people of the lower socioeconomic groups, and it also tended to be immigrants, first and second generation immigrants whose English was not their first language. And like I said, you need to talk to your culture. So we went out, we did focus groups all around the state. We talked to African American families, Arab American families, Asian Pacific Islander families, rural poor families in the Upper Peninsula, which tended to be white, Hispanic American families, and Native American families. And we went to them, and we just got a feel for what their value are, how they see the world, the interaction they have with their children. And what we did is we took samples of work that existed from different organizations that help in this area and showed them to them to get how they felt that content was communicating with them. And the main thing we found was in a lot of the materials that exist, they just didn't see themselves in it. There's nobody that looks like me or my children in this content, so they won't see themselves in it. If you want to connect with the culture, your content should reflect the people of that culture. So we went back and took the materials and created versions of them for each of the different groups. We created a Hispanic American version. We created a Native American version, created an Arab American version, and then an African American version. Then we created a multicultural one that just kind of had a hodgepodge of everybody, so that one could be used anywhere. We took these back and had a second round of focus groups and said, you know, look what we did. We listened to you. We created materials that you can see yourself in. But a funny thing happened. They looked at the content we created specifically for them, and then they looked at the multicultural one and they said, no, you've got it wrong. We don't want content that strictly shows people who look like me, because that's not the world we live in, and it's not the world we want for our children. We want them to experience diversity, and they do, in fact. So we learned a valuable lesson, and you need to make sure you know the whole story. We took this one insight and thought we were doing the right thing, but we didn't know the whole story. It wasn't that they just wanted to see people who look like them. It's just that they were missing from the mix, and they wanted to be a part of the mix. So we went back and created content. Here's the Arab American and the African American version. It still featured the community we were trying to connect with, but it showed more pictures of diverse situations where it was coming together. The next thing I would say, when you're trying to create content that's appropriate for each culture that you're connecting with, is you need to find out what their values are. There are universal human values and universal American values, but every culture has different things that are important to them that they really value more strongly than other cultures. So you need to find out what those values are so you can connect with them. So what I'm going to show you now, I'm going to take you through just a sampling of some of the findings we found through these focus groups about what each group valued, and then how we created content that tied into that. So when we talked to our Hispanic American families, they talked about the importance of and respecting the family, respecting the traditions, being supporting of your community, and giving back to your community. So, tying into that value of family and tradition, we create content like this, where it says, it's never too early to start passing down traditions your family have held for years. It gives kids a sense of family and belonging. Hashtag early learning, hashtag family traditions, hashtag share with your kids. So this content did two things. One, it could share something that we wanted to get out there about early learning, which is when you do things, do crafts and things with your kids early on, it helps them. It's a learning opportunity for them. But we tied it in to the values we found out this culture had, where it's tradition and family. So the content accomplished what we needed to, but it also connected to this particular culture based on the value that they held. When we talked to our Native Americans, what was one value that was unique to them was how much the community helps in raising a child. As important as the blood relatives to a child's upbringing is the aunties, which are other women in the community who aren't necessarily related, but there's someone you would call auntie, and there's someone who helps in the raising of your child. And they really want to preserve their traditions and their culture. So we took these values, and here's part of some of the content we created. When the whole community helps teach and raise up a child to be a successful person, that child grows up embracing and respecting where she came from. And we have this photo. This was actually one of the people in our focus group and her daughter working on some Native American arts and crafts. So again, we're tying into the value of the community teaching and raising up the child, and then the child embracing and respecting their culture. Accomplishing what we need to, but in a way that connects to their value. When we talked to our Arab American families, one thing that was very clear was the importance of family and how you must respect your family. So when we created content around that, you see on the left, respect for your family starts early when little moments together become teaching moments for life. Hashtag early learning, hashtag family time, hashtag respect, hashtag success. So here we're taking that value of respect for your family, and again, putting in context of what you should be doing with your young child. And then on the right, we have content that talks about you are your child's best and first and best teacher. Make it the best learning experience, one that fits your family's traditions and culture. We can help. And then it's a connection to one of the organizations that can help with early learning for families. And here again, we tied into the importance of tradition and culture, and shared something we wanted to tell, but in a way that connects to the culture because it connects to their values. When we talked to our Arab American families, some of the things that were very important to them was that their child learns to be confident and that they do well in school, have academic success. And this stems from the fact they are lower socioeconomic families, so they want their child to be able to rise up above that, and they also want the child to have the confidence to face the systemic racism that they know that child is going to face. So those are important elements of their values. And it got content like here on the left where it says, getting an early start on reading together helps children build confidence and be ready for success in school. So it tied into both those values and talks about starting to read to your child early. Another thing that came out during these focus groups, we had some images like the one on the right here, where there was a father interacting with his child. And that was something that was important to them because there's a bad stereotype about African-American dads being absentee dads. And for the most part, like with any of us, it's not true. They are very involved in their families, and that was a way to connect to the culture, was that we show the reality of it, that the dads do interact with their children. The next lesson I'd like to talk about is just to warn you that I know what I was presenting was kind of broken down by ethnicity, but there also was, they all had a similar culture in terms of socioeconomics and barriers to getting information. So remember that being of the same ethnicity doesn't necessarily mean the same culture. When I presented the more robust findings of the different focus groups, some of our clients who are African-American said, you know, some of these values from the African-American families, that's not how I and my friends feel. And that's because it's a different culture. The families we were talking about were urban poor families, and our clients were of a different culture. So try and remember that just because a group is the same ethnicity doesn't necessarily mean the same culture, and take that into context when you're creating content. So we talked about finding out the values that each culture has, but the other thing you need to do is find out what are the issues and barriers that exist. You do this for two reasons. One, you don't want to inadvertently step on a landmine by creating content that raises one of these issues or throws up one of these barriers. But more importantly, if you know what they are, you can help create content that connects with them and helps them deal with those issues or get over those barriers. For instance, when we talked to the Arab American families, it was very clear that within this culture, there's a stigma for kids with development delays. And this could be something as serious as Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, or it could be as simple as they're just late bloomers and are late learning to talk or walk or crawl. But some of the moms we talked to who did have children with development delays talked about they had got their child help, but whenever they went to these appointments, they always told their family they were going on a play date because of the stigma for development delays within their culture. So we created content to help alleviate that, talk about why you shouldn't have that stigma. It may not solve the problem, but at least it addresses the issue in a way that does help someone trying to get help. So on the left, we talk about getting your child extra help when he needs it is a sign of strength, not weakness. Find the help he needs and we connect him to Early On, which is an organization that helps children with development delays. And then over here on the right, we have another piece of content. Learning how to deal with difficulties early in life allows your child to grow and blossom into the best they can be. Learn more at, and again, connection to early on. Also, when we talked to Arab American families, and there were some other ones too, but especially this group, tended to keep their kids home until kindergarten. In fact, a lot of people think that learning doesn't happen until you go to school, go to kindergarten. But we know the importance of early learning, so we wanted to come up with ways to encourage them to put their kids in preschool, not wait for kindergarten. So here's some content around that. Why is preschool important? 90% of your child's brain development happens by age 5. You can find a quality preschool at, and we gave them a link which will help them find a preschool near them. Then they can search and find one that fits their culture and whatever their needs are. When we talked to the Hispanic American families, one thing they were worried about was they wanted to be involved in their child's preschool, but they weren't sure they would be welcome. When in fact they are very welcome. So we've created content to help them resolve that issue. On the left, we talk about participating with your child in their preschool could be the spark that ignites a lifelong love of learning. Hashtag early learning, family time, respect, success. And then on the right, we talk about your family's involvement in your child's preschool is important. Head Start works with parents to create the best learning that fits your child, your culture, and your community. And then we created so a local Head Start could put their own link in there. Again, letting them know not only can you participate, but you're welcome to do so. And by doing so, you can help your child get an education that fits with your culture and your community. And then finally, look at what holidays during the year and what days of the year are important. Each culture has their own days that are important to them. You know, we all do the Christmas and the New Year's and the 4th of July content, but within every culture, there's our days that are important to them. There are holidays that are important to them. So what we did is we went through and we created a year-long content calendar, and we looked at what days are important for each of these groups and created content for it and put it into the content calendar. So you can connect with them by connecting with days that are important to them. So for our Arab American families, we found this great video. It's just curated content. We found this great video of all these cute kids talking about what Ramadan means to them. So we created this content to go out a few days before Ramadan started. Ramadan is almost here. Watch this fun video with your kids and get them hashtag Ramadan ready, hashtag early learning. But if you're going to tie into a different culture's holidays or events or special days, make sure you do it with respect and something that actually makes sense for that. Unlike these advertisers and how they treated Martin Luther King Day, neither of which had really anything to do with Martin Luther King or the day. And it certainly didn't respect the culture that adores Dr. King. So let's recap the 10 ways I put out for you to create culturally appropriate content. First, you need to create content that's authentic to your brand. If you're not authentic, you're going to get called out on it, and your post could have actually the opposite effect that you're going for. So make sure whatever content you are, even though you want to tie into a specific culture, it still needs to be authentic to who your brand is or who your organization is. Second, follow through on your promises. If you promise something, you have to follow through, or you have to at least, if for some reason you can't, you at least need to put content out there that explains why you can't and what's happening instead. Because if you don't, you're going to get called out on it, and you're going to turn off the very cultures you're trying to connect with. Important, have empathy and put yourself in their shoes. You know, what does the world look like from their point of view? You know, if you were in their culture, how would this content come off to you? You know, if you have empathy and put yourself in their shoes, that's half the battle to creating culturally appropriate content. And then talk to them whenever possible. The best way to get a feel for how the people in a community feel is to talk to them. Now, maybe you can't do focus groups like we did, but you can go into the community and just talk to people that are part of that community. And at the very least, if you can't do that, you can do research by reading their social media posts, looking at what they find important, what they value. It'll at least give you a feel. Talking to them is better, but at least get a feel for what is important. And remember, when you're trying to connect with the culture, people want to see themselves. So often, groups other than Middle America aren't portrayed in content. And if you don't portray them, then how are they going to connect with you? If they don't see themselves in your brand, if you don't see them in your brand, they're not going to see themselves in their brand. But make sure it's not exclusive, as we learned. We live in a diverse world, and people want to have that diversity. Make sure you see the whole picture. I use the example of us not realizing that we should make it diverse while representing, but anything, any insight you get, make sure you're looking at it from the whole picture. You know, you can glean one little piece of intel and do something about it, but if you're not looking at it from the whole picture, you might be missing the boat, as we did in our first go round. And make sure that when you're thinking about creating culturally appropriate content, that you don't think that everyone who's the same ethnicity or race is the same culture. They will have things in common, but every ethnicity, every race has different cultures within it. There's layers of different people, depending on their geography, depending on their beliefs, depending on their socioeconomic status, depending on their political leanings, depending on their education level. There's all kinds of different levels of culture within every group. And importantly, find out what each culture values. You're not going to be able to connect with them unless you know what they value and you can tie that into the content you're creating. That's the best way to connect with them. But make sure you find out what the issues and barriers are that exist too, so you can not bring them up in a way unintended, but you can address them and help them get over whatever the issue or barrier is. Incorporate holidays and special events, special dates into your content calendar, but make sure you do it respectfully. It goes back to having that empathy and putting yourself in their shoes. If this was your holiday or your special day, what would you think about this content? Make sure that it fits that criteria. And finally, to wrap up my presentation, I'm sad that I won't be able to join you for a nice Kalamazoo Stout this evening, but I am glad I was able to present long distance without a tie or pants. I'm open for questions. That's it. If you have questions, put them in the chat bar. Dun, 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 dun. All right. We have a question that says, can you provide perspective on building ongoing feedback loops between a brand and different audience it's intended to connect with? Is this something that you do to ensure a brand is not missing the mark with their content, or so which approaches have been, oops, sorry, I lost it here. Which approaches have been most effective, e.g. monitoring social feedback, recurring focus groups, building diverse creative teams, etc. I would say, having some way of getting feedback on an ongoing basis is great. And it doesn't really matter how you do it. If you can do panels, if you can have a channel where you connect to it, if you can do focus groups, or you just have a group within that community who you just rely on to check in with every once in a while and get their feedback as to how you're doing, what's new that you need to tie into. And that seems to be, oh, here we go. I'm interested in the content presentation process. Once you have these insights, do you think it's important to, and then I guess we couldn't see the rest, sorry. I'll go up here. Oh. I would say, in terms of how to create the content, the creation process, once you have the insights, it's a matter of just, giving them to your creative people, whoever the people are who create your content, and then look at what you're trying to accomplish with your content and how those insights fit into it. I kind of showed you how we took some of the insights from the focus groups and created content around it. It's really a process of both strategy and creative. The strategy is you want to tie into these values and these insights, but you have these things you need to accomplish. And then it's up to whoever your creative team is, if it's you or you have a specific creative team, to work through it and figure out how to make that work. And if you have time, you can do multiple content and test it. If you don't, you just have to go by what you think works and see what works. And if you have a feedback loop, like in our last question, you'll find out it works. And even if you don't, if it's not working, generally people will tell you. I have, why does the C-suite still not get so often in today's environment? Do you see a difference between publicly traded and privately owned businesses? The C-suite is always, except for those who are enlightened, there's always going to be a battle. I remember early on in social media having to fight with the C-suite to make them understand that this was an important thing. It's why I was part of the social media club at Detroit in the early days. It was all about getting not just brands, but the C-suites to buy into this. I think once you start creating content that really connects with the culture and they see the results, that's really the only way you're going to get the C-suite to buy in. They generally want to see results. So you don't need to give them all the background, all that. You need to do the due diligence, put it out there, get results, and then you can report back. See that we're getting a lot of good results. People are connecting with this content, whatever ROI metrics they want to look at. Do I have an opinion on movement to breaking down silos happening or still turf wars? That's always a problem. This works best if there are no silos, because the people going out and doing the research and the people gleaning the insights are often not the same as the people creating the content, and might not be the same as your community managers. So I think you need to, when possible, at least once a month over a content meeting, get all of the silos together so they know that they're all on the same page. If you can do that, that'll help a lot. Silos always hurt because somebody's making a decision that's not informed. So the more you can bring them together at least once a month on a monthly content meeting, I would suggest. And looks like that's it for our questions. Well, thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be your virtual keynote today. My information's on the bottom if you want to get a hold of me. That's my website, my email address, and I'm at Mike K. McClure on Twitter and most social media. Except for one, I actually have Mike McClure, but anyway. Well, thank you very much.